Right, good afternoon ladies and gentlemen, welcome. My name is James McGee and I'm an independent hospitality consultant. What that means for those of you that don't understand it, it means that I'm a marriage counsellor for the hospitality industry. In other words, I mediate and manage the relationship between the owners and the operator or developer. I've been in the business for 25 years, doing concepts to openings, and I have done 21 hotels from concept to opening. My background is that I have a degree in architecture, I have a BSc in construction management and an MBA and all sorts of other things, but my passion is hotels, and that's what I do. I'm joined this afternoon in this graveyard session after lunch to keep you awake by my esteemed panel of colleagues, and just like to introduce them. Beata Caleta, Design Director of DSA Architects. Philippe Berthard, Senior VP Development for Accor Hotels. Thabo Makena from Piermont Group Chief Development and Compliance Executive. And Michael Devereux, Director of Development and Acquisitions for Starwood Hotels. What I'd like to do is just take you very briefly through 5 stages, and the 5 stages being the influences on hotel design, the stages of development, the participants in the development process, their relationships, the timing, and then we'll get to questions of issues that typically arise during the process. But first I thought I'd start with something a little bit different just to wake you up in terms of spectacular hotels. And this is the Marina Bay Sands Hotel in Singapore, and probably the most spectacular hotel that has been opened in the last 5 years around the world. And the reason that I show it to you is because, one, it is quite a complex design. Number 2, it's not the sort of hotel that gets done on a regular basis. And number 3, structurally it's very, very difficult. It's 58 stories high, it's got 255 keys, and the slope of the towers is 26 degrees at the worst point, and those towers are joined at level 34. And then on top of that, they've stuck this sky park, as they call it, which is basically a freeway cantilevered in 2 directions. And it's the length of it is longer than 3 football fields, and if you laid the Eiffel Tower down, it could lie there quite comfortably. The interesting thing, of course, is that these kind of hotels are typically only done where there is a casino involved, because commercially this would never see the light of day. Because one of the things they did was to put this swimming pool on the roof, and that swimming pool is 150 meters long with the vanishing edge, and it's effectively 2,500 tons of dynamic load on the structure. So you can imagine trying to manage that load in terms of the design back down to the ground when you've got sloping towers. So Arabs, who were the engineers on this, did an outstanding job to be able to manage all of these loads and this design, particularly as it's in an earthquake area. So I thought we would start with that, because this is not the way you would normally put a swimming pool in a hotel. That kind of dynamic load you'd want to have at ground level or as near to it as possible. Incidentally, there's 22 lifts in this particular development, and obviously, as I said, it is a casino hotel. Okay, moving on to hotel developments, often driven by ego, and one needs those big personalities to do these kind of projects like that one, or like South Africa's one, which was the Palace at Lost City. And there's normally 5 influences on the development. These are the location obviously, the economics of it in terms of will the project work commercially, etc., etc. The planning and the design, how do you squeeze commercially the right number of rooms onto the size of the plot and within the planning requirements, etc. The enterprise in terms of the commercial realities. What is it going to be, a corporate business hotel or a resort hotel, etc., and how does that work in terms of the destination? And then finally, how is it going to be marketed? How will it fit into the market, and how will it get the guests into the hotel? Moving on from that, we can look at the stages of development, and typically this is the normal 8 stages that occur. And the first one obviously is the preliminary study, and this is where we identify the site, initial professional team selection, project definition and space planning, preliminary market research, in other words, what are the returns going to be, what is the likely occupancies and all of those kind of things, very broad level budgets, and preliminary feasibility analysis. Stage 2 is the concept development, and typically this includes the design charrette with the design team and the preliminary specialist studies that are required, market research, EIA, traffic, etc., as well as the concept development in terms of exteriors, interiors, F&B, landscaping, lighting, etc. And typically some operator input if there's an operator on board at that stage, as well as the rezoning and local authority requirements. Stage 3, schematic design, includes the professional team appointments, specialist studies that might be required, architectural, schematic design, civil, structural, landscaping, MEP, those kind of things, initial program, and finalization of the budget and feasibility review and risk analysis. Thereafter we go into design development, and typically that includes your planning submissions, and I think everybody's kind of familiar with these sort of processes and where they go, and then into the construction documentation and the procurement and contractor appointments, and finally into construction. And I had a client the other week and said to me, why do I have to spend so much money on fees up front when we should really only be paying when we get into construction? Well, if you look at the process here, you'll see how much work needs to go into the process way before the construction starts. And then finally, project closeout and handover. Okay, the parties involved. Obviously the owner-developer, and I'm assuming a normal owner-developer situation with a operator. Obviously the banks who are doing the funding, or however the funding is being done, and typically that's often forgotten in the process. The consultants, and these would be typically the big 5, which is the architects, interior designers, project managers, QSs, and structural engineers. And thereafter, the electrical, MEP, wet services, fire, civil, landscape, architecture, kitchen and laundry, lighting, acoustic, signage, branding, health and safety, and EIA. Again, there's a lot of times percentages are bandied around about how much the professional fees should be, and most of the time they exclude or include or don't have half of these people involved, because clearly if you've got an existing brand on board, you're not going to go through the branding and signage design, and you won't have a consultant for that. So it varies quite considerably, and probably within the order of between 12 to 16%. Now, lots of clients all object and complain and say, wow, those figures are very high. But the reality is that 16% of the actual construction cost. When you start factoring in all of your costs, including your land cost and so on, you end up with a fee that is probably in the order of between 2 and 4% of the total project. So the learning point here is it's never clever to try and save money on professional fees. And I know all my consultant friends will love me for this, but it's true. You pick the best team to play for you on the field and you get them out there so that they can play and do the best that they can do. You don't pick the worst team or pick the best team and then try and chisel them down in their fees and get the third team player on the field, because that's not the way you need to go into a very involved process such as this. Next one obviously is the operator, whether branded or unbranded, but their technical team and their opening team will be involved in the process, and the main contractor and subcontractors, and the direct contractors, because there's a lot of work that happens that doesn't normally fall under the aegis of the main contractor, and therefore falls outside of their security ambit as well as their insurance and so on. The local authorities and the licensing bodies, I think most of us have been through the problem of getting the liquor license and all the inspections prior to opening. And finally, the insurers, who also have a bearing on the opening of the hotel. So those are the parties involved. And now if we look at the relationships, typically this is the standard relationship, and you'll see where prompt normally falls in between the owner and the operator managing that relationship, what I call the honeymoon period until the opening of the hotel, and then all the various consultants, because there's a natural conflict between the owner and the operator. The owner wants return on investment and the operator wants maximum flexibility and to improve their brand. Those are not necessarily mutually exclusive ideals. So that process needs to be managed carefully, and obviously if you've signed a 20-year contract with an operator, you don't want to have to say no, no, no to every single request that you get. So it's quite important that somebody manages that process. What's also important, of course, is to make sure that the decisions are made in time for the professional team to do their job, so that you don't redesign the hotel 16 times before you even put a spade in the ground. Then, of course, we have the banks and their relationship with the owner, and again, if that process is not managed properly, there's often delays in terms of payments and the ongoing effect that causes. And then we have the direct contractors, who are normally fall under the aegis of the project managers, and those are the carpet installations, FF&E, OS&E, AV and IT installations. Okay, then we start, if we look at the timing, general rule is that a 120 key hotel normally takes 3 years, but we were talking yesterday in terms of what happens in Africa, and that's very different. Upmarket hotels average 5 years, and the real difficulty that makes hotel development stand out from all other commercial developments is that your opening date is set 9 to 12 months in advance because of the wholesale and retail industry requirements. Therefore, it is not movable, and it has to open, because if you have contractors on site when you open, then you get forced to discount. And if you open badly, it takes 3 years at least to recover that. What have I done here? There we go. So a 3-year recovery minimum if you open badly. So the trick is to get it right, but also to make sure that it all comes together at the right time. Obviously, the highest risk that one has is the rate of exchange, because this applies mainly to your FF&E, OS&E, IT, AV, and all the stuff that you're bringing in. And this occurs at the last 20% in time of the program and can amount to 35% of the cost. So there's always a hurry-up factor to get the job done as quickly as possible so that the orders can be placed and so on, but that's determined by when the mock-ups are done, when the approvals are done, etc., etc., and where you are. Right, let's move on to the questions for the team. The first question that I'd like to pose to Beata is, in new hotel projects, there's often confusion between the client and the architect regarding the project definition. How should this be handled?
Well, the project definition is important for any development. This is where everything starts and needs to be really considered carefully. In hospitality, project definition requires certain studies to be commenced before the project can be fully defined. So we start with the site. The site location is absolutely important to define the project. Site details, zoning is important because without the proper zoning we can't start designing the hotel on the site. Then one has to decide what type of development, hospitality development is going to be. Whether this is going to be a seaside resort, whether this is going to be a business hotel, is it going to focus on local tourists or international tourists, and whether this is going to be just a boutique hotel. So everything has a huge impact on the design and the facilities the hotel is going to have. Obviously, the grading of the hotel needs to be confirmed, whether this is going to be 3, 4, 5 star, yet again. All these hotels are very different. They're different not only in size, but also in facilities and in quality. So the feasibility needs to commence really early, because only once the feasibility is done, all these aspects can be confirmed. And budget needs to be established. So without the budget, we still don't have a project definition, because we don't know what we're going to design to what specific budget. And finally, the operator. Very important to actually define the operator and whether this hotel is going to be branded or is not going to be branded. And all of this obviously is going to define the hotel. Very often clients come to us and they say, I've got a lovely property and I would love to have a 5-star luxury hotel. Really, this is what I'm interested in. We don't have any topography of the site, and the sites are never really flat like pancakes, but client usually says, if I see the site very flat, there's not going to be any problem. Is there any operator? No, we're going to worry about this later. This is not an issue right now, so we're really looking for the luxury hotel. So architects start with the generic design, and obviously in the later stage, the feasibility is being done. The site proves to be not suitable for 5-star hotel, but perhaps for 4-star hotel. So the hotel is going to be on average 40% smaller than it was designed originally. So one has to start from the beginning again. And then the operator is being introduced, and operators are very different. They all have their own standards. So one is going to operate a hotel which has rooms 25 square meters, another one is going to say I need 28 square meters. So they're also again very different. So to avoid any design changes and the confusion, it is very, very important to conduct all these studies right at the beginning before actually designers are getting involved. And the project definition is going to be established by all the studies. The grading of the hotel, the size of the hotel, the operator of the hotel, and obviously the locality.
Thanks, Beata. We'll move through these questions and then we'll take questions from the floor. The second question is, often the most overlooked part of the project definition is the market research, and I think you touched on that. And to Michael Devereaux, in your opinion, how important is this step? Sorry, to Philippe. Keep your...
No, I would say that basically that's absolutely strategic. You define, of course, the project and the brand you're going to propose because of the market. But once you have defined the brand, whether it's a mid-scale or even an economy brand, very much standardized, then you have to adapt to the market. Is it a corporate meeting-oriented market, or is it more MICE market? Is there a banqueting, wedding market to address? Then you have to really reflect on that when you do your hotel program, which is absolutely strategic and sometimes not really taken as seriously as it should. We We spend time, for instance, with our commercial people, sales, distribution people to see exactly on a location, especially when we have some clue because we already operate hotel or we have partners and so on. Then we look at the segment, at the distribution, what's going to be the flow of customers, existing customers, new travelers we're going to channel and so on, to keep being within the most optimized development for each square meter. It does concern also the decisions about the F&B concept. It has to be taken as a profit center on its own. Do we go for simply just a basic all-day dinner and that's it, or do we add up F&B concept, and which one? Do we need a rooftop restaurant? Does it make sense? The same for the shop. You see in some hotels, Galleria. They start the project with shopping Galleria and so on because it looks nice. But at the end of the day, it's very dead. It's not vibrant because it's not really fit for this kind of activity. And you have square meters which are not really profit-oriented. It's not a return on investment oriented. So there is, I would say, a best use study of every square foot which is going to be developed in the hotel in terms of additional facilities, additional to your core offer of the brand and the concept. And it goes as well when you're in city centers or in mixed-use schemes. It goes as well with the best use of the ground floor. You have capital cities or locations where ground floor will have high value for some commercial activities, and then depending on your hotel concept, but if it's an economy concept, for instance, or a mid-scale concept, you can go, or even sometimes luxury concept, you take it into account to put your hotel preferably above this ground floor, which is going to be dedicated to better profitability and activities in that respect. So all of that has to be taken into account for the hotel program, and the hotel program is the reflection as much as you can of the market study, but not a vague market study. It's really to be targeting every activity which has to be seen as a profit center. With some nuances, sometimes you can have facilities, spa concept, for instance, or even high branded F&B, which is not going to be as such the best return on investment you will have, but you have to take into account its positive influence on the hotel as a destination, on the average rate you're going to be able to have on your rooms, because you have this kind also of address for a long time or for a period of time to launch the hotel. So that's really something complex and on which I think we spend a lot of time, and not only for upscale segments, but also for economy hotels now, especially when they have a big capacity. And I will just finish as we have IBIS hotels in Europe, which are basically rooms and F&B offer, and that's it. There is no meeting, there is no gym, nothing. And in some capital cities of Africa, you find these IBIS in Lagos, for instance, having a swimming pool, having even a gym and meeting rooms, because you have a segment of clientele of expats often who are going to spend the weekend, who are going to stay for 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, long time, so then you have to reflect differently. And the same if your IBIS is not 100, 150 rooms, but it's 300, 400 rooms. Then you need to add some facilities to support that.
Thank you, Philip. Michael, for a new build hotel, does the site come before concept, or does concept and then site identification? Your views on this, please.
Having 9 distinctive lifestyle brands in our portfolio allows us the luxury to be able to fit a brand or a concept to a location. But with that being said, location is certainly what drives the investment appetite for any of our investors or owners on board. And just touching again on feasibility work, feasibility is probably to any owner the best money you're ever going to spend initially on a project. In particular in the new development areas, in outlying areas and areas where our brands don't, or any other brands or international brands don't exist, that feasibility study is going to tell you exactly where you should be, what type of brand you should be putting in, what market you're attracting. So those are sort of undeveloped areas where I'm saying feasibility work really is important. In areas that we do currently exist and operate, we have a vast amount of information that helps owners to make decisions on specific types of brands as to what the market needs and what works and what's going to work in the future. But bear in mind, location is always it's like looking into the future. A location changes, population shift, urban areas become degenerated in certain ways, and we're going into 20, sometimes 30-year contracts where over the period of that contract, your concept might not last as long as your location will. So you've got to be able to then adapt your concept in that specific location and sort of bide your time as well and see the owners through with possible changes that could be made.
Often owners come and say that they're developing, particularly in Africa, they're developing a small shopping centre, and then they decide, it'll be a good idea to put a hotel on top. And they approach groups like yourself with these kind of schemes. Do you find that an easy one to deal with?
Mixed use concepts are becoming more and more apparent, and especially throughout Africa. And in particular South Africa. South Africa has driven the mixed-use sort of development process through concepts like Melrose Arch, which are extremely successful. And Africa's adopting more and more of these types of developments. Mixed-use is a really interesting concept for us when it comes to shared services and shared use and the rights of those shared uses when it comes to a particular hotel owner. And as long as the rules are in place, those concepts work. And again, for brands, putting a luxury brand in a shopping centre never works. But putting certain brands like a Loft, which is a really sort of select service brand that doesn't require a lot of back of house or a lot of F&B components that will feed off other restaurants and nightlife activity, or close to airports or convention centres, those concepts work extremely well in a mixed-use environment.
Thanks, Mike. Often the professional team appointments are haphazard and are done on the basis of price. Thabo, what would your recommendations be?
Thanks, James. I think the question is probably framed for the developer of a hotel asset who's not necessarily the operator as well. Because, I would not be so presumptuous as to lecture experienced developers who are also operators in how they go about appointing their professional consultant, because often in these companies, very established ways of doing so, often there are very long-term relationships with the consultant. So I think that it is appropriate to deal with the question, frame my reply, to deal with the situation where the developer is not necessarily an experienced operator. And in the second category, the developer who perhaps, as was referred, earlier at this conference, who's maybe someone with a high net worth individual who's seeking to develop a trophy asset. So this is where this haphazardness you're talking about happens, and sometimes maybe the price might be the driving consideration. And it is important, I think, that James set out the steps that must be taken, I think, in the development process. And the critical part in this development step is long before construction. Whether you're a high net worth individual doing a trophy asset, whether you're a developer who's not an experienced, I think it is important for you to answer the fundamental question about, what is it in terms of grading you're developing? What is the size? and where is this piece of land that we are referring to? This is the feasibility. It is very, very important. Because once you've answered the question, on the grading or the level of hotel, on the sizing, and on the location, once you know the answers to those questions, then you can go about, systematically looking for professional consultants to assist you. Because I think that your choice, which is determined by your feasibility, determines who you're going to appoint as the architect or the principal agent. Very importantly, because if you are doing a 5-star hotel, you might approach a different team of consultants than if you're doing a entry-level 1-star property. Those are different considerations. So to avoid that haphazardly, you have to do that. And yeah, I think that, for most cases, the typical, first professional consultant will be the principal agent, the architect. And often, if you are the categories I'm talking about, the developer who's not an operator, or the trophy asset developer, yeah, I think that whoever you now have matched for your asset to be developed will typically have networks of other consultants, and you can use them, to select and interview and choose. But the feasibility stage is critical in arriving at a decision, and maybe ultimately including the level of investment you want to do, and then only then move to identifying the professional consultant. The second part of your question, James, has to do with price. Is price the principal consideration? It is an important consideration, including for trophy asset acquirers or developers and developers who are not operators. It is still an important consideration, but it's not the only one, and not necessarily the main one. Obviously, you need to engage a set of professional consultants who are experienced and whose pedigree is suited to what is it that you seek to develop. I think it's very important. I'm not saying necessarily it must be a close shop of only experience and established groups. It may be someone who's starting out a new, but brings the pedigree to the startup operation that you require to deliver the sort of hotel assets that is in keeping with what you're looking for. So yeah, I think that the final comment I'd like to make is that on our continental region, there are always the developmental or transformational considerations in the engagement of the professionals. I think that, and these are worthy objectives in terms of stimulating the experience, stimulating the local professional base, and so you will be expected to, as a developer in that particular market, to, as best as possible, as far as possible, engage local, professionals. So you have to take that into consideration. So you can't just, leave from Johannesburg and finalize your team and move to a different territory and omit the fact that in that territory you may be required, in fact, by law, not just by practice, to engage the professionals. I think, and typically these considerations will say which of the consultants, must be hired either solely or in a joint venture capacity. So it's a very important consideration, especially in our continental region, which still sees with this important developmental aspect.
Thanks, Taba. But as Barry Nell says, I put it to you that more often than not, I come across developers that are putting together a scheme, and I say, have you got a professional team? And they, oh yes, no, we've got an architect and we've got concept drawings. And I say, who's the architect and what experience have they got in mid-market hotels or upper market hotels or whatever? Oh no, he did an alteration for my wife in the kitchen. And that's the level of experience that often is in this situation. Now, given the fact that hotels are the most complex buildings to develop, compared to any other building, it's the most complex building because of the fact that you have to get it together and you have to actually make sure that it opens on time, everything 100%. Clearly, it's not the clever thing to do to try out or give a new architect experience on that. There are ways of dividing up the project to give out pieces to the inexperienced local architects or whatever, but you must make sure that you pick the right team, because it's like going into a World Cup with a junior school side. It ain't going to work. So it's typically very, very important that you actually interview and make sure that they have the correct experience. And that goes right across the board. And it's one of the reasons why the branded operators are so insistent that the interior designer that is appointed understands the brand and the brand concept. Because the quickest way to destroy the brand concept is to get an interior designer that doesn't understand it. So in all of their management agreements, they insist on the right of first approval, I suppose it is. Okay, let's move on. Philippe, contractor procurement is often done on a fixed price lump sum basis in Africa. Your views on this approach? It was mentioned yesterday, in fact, by my friend from Residor, that this is the way things go in Africa.
Yeah, sure. That's a safe approach, basically. But there are some but. First of all, it's fundamental to develop in details the project before asking price costing assessment to the contractor. Which doesn't mean that you don't have to involve the contractor, structural engineer, M&E engineers in the design phase with the architect. That works very well, and you save time and money from the very beginning of the design. But when you ask or you start the competitive process for the proposals from the contractors, then it's really at a stage where it makes sense, where you have your hotel program fixed, where you have the schedule of areas which is detailed and breakdown, and where you have very much advanced, if not definitive, drawings. The building permit can always alter here and there, but at least you will have a costing on a project which is well defined. In order to do so, the second but, if you want this approach to be safe and to be cost effective, is to define accurately, precisely the scope of works. Because, of course, contractors make money on extra works. We worked with, in Europe, with big firms, contracting firms, and they had the standard letters ready when they were signing the contract with you, the design and bid contract. They had the letters already with the legal department for the extra cost they were going to ask you. So basically, it's important to define the scope of works precisely with the technical team, knowing exactly what is inside, what is going to be the cost of the project, and what is out of this cost. And then, in order to do so, it is important to avoid asking fixed commitment on items which are at risk. Example, cost of foundations if you don't have any clue about the nature of the soil, if you don't have geotechnical survey adequate. So it's better to, because what's going to happen is that the contractors are going to cover themselves so much with contingencies and margins that anyway it doesn't make sense, and you will pay from the beginning, you will pay more than what would be possibly the reality by treating it after or separately. Other problem, possible risk is if you don't have a very precise, detailed bedroom and bathroom fitting out. Then also the contractor is going to price it very expensively to cover himself, and so you have to be precise on that. And I would say that third, yes, in Africa, a lot of countries is if you don't also define precisely the import procedures and cost associated to importation procedures, procurement. So when we talk about this approach, so it's safe, but you have really to to play the rules and be absolutely accurate in the scope of works and what is defined. Otherwise, at the end of the day, you're going to have extra cost and you're going to have contingencies and so much, because that's the game. The contractor will commit, but he will cover himself. So then it doesn't make sense. At the end of the day, this approach is safe, and you have, I think, to do it. And Andrew McLaren was right. Except if you are sometimes in your domestic market with, we were for a long time, for instance, in France and some countries of Europe, Germany and so on, with a high density of hotels and technical resources. So we were able to break down subcontract and do it directly without going for design and build with one contractor on a fixed sum. But most of the time now it's not possible anymore, and not in your abroad if you're not really domestic.
Thank you. And also, clearly, the fixed price, because of the level of detail that one needs to go into for the contractor to price it, you really have to get your complete documentation done in advance. Full documentation and specification, which presupposes you either have to ring fence your millwork, your bathrooms and all of those things, because you probably won't have done a mock-up room that is approved at that point in time. It varies depending on the brand that you've got, but it's one of the issues that one needs to look at. Also, there's still going to be direct contractors at the end installing your TV sets and your telephones and all of those things. And if there's not going to be a huge fight about who's damaging what and scratching the wallpaper and so on, one needs to make sure that the contractor, if it's a fixed price lump sum, that he's finished and snagged and out before any of those items happen. So it's not just an easy way of dealing with it. There are quite a lot of other issues that revolve around it, so it's not a complete fix-all. Okay. Let's move on. Often the hotel developer is undecided on whether to employ a branded group or go it alone. Each case obviously has its merits. However, when is the latest that this decision should be taken to have the least impact on the budget? Beata, you fight with this all the time.
Well, very often, or most of the time, we start the concept design without actually defining operator. And very often, there is a question whether there is going to be
Microphone.
an operator. And the question is still hanging there, whether there is going to be any operator or it's going to be just operated by the owner. So right at the beginning, the owner of the hotel needs to answer a few fundamental questions. Whether the hotel is going to be branded, and if it's going to be a branded, then what brand is going to be? And if it's going to be a branded, who is going to manage this hotel? So these are the very important questions right at the beginning of the development. There are a few disadvantages of hotel branding. Hotel operators are very strict and very fixed with their standards and are very often not flexible. So yes, there are restrictions on the design. Brands very often benefit a hotel group and not always the selected site, and obviously hotel management comes with a cost. But regarding the branding, there are incredible advantages for the hotel owner and the entire design team. And the list is just ongoing, and not, we can just mention that there are manuals in place, that there are ways of operating the hotel, of marketing the hotel, and the branding of the hotel obviously is going to attract more tourists. But for the designers, it's actually very clearly defined the concept of the hotel. So right at the beginning, when decision is made about branding of the hotel and the operators being selected, designers immediately get the very clear brief from the operator about the concept of the design, and this is fundamental to avoid any changes. So as soon the operator is introduced, the better for the project. We believe that the operator should be introduced to the team not later than at the design concept, at the conceptual design. It would be better if we can start a little bit earlier, but during the conceptual design, this is a very good moment because this is where we forming our concept and our design. Sometimes the operator is introduced a bit later during the design development stage. This is still when we developing the design, so it's still acceptable. However, during the tender documentation and construction documentation, it is really, really bad. When it's the construction, it is absolutely unforgivable. Operators, as I have mentioned, have very strict standards and they all differ. And if the operator is being introduced at the construction time, it can mean that additional facilities, F&B facilities, need to be introduced, that the back of house needs to be larger, that the rooms need to be bigger, and there, of course, the documentation needs to be done once again. This has a huge impact on the overall program and on the procurement, and at the end, at the opening date. So I would say that operators, the best if they introduce not later than the conceptual stage.
Would you like to share with us your worst case scenario that you've been through?
Well, we're doing, I think, one project in Africa, in Rwanda. I think it's just trying to count 6 or 8 years, must be. And we're going through the third operator right now. And obviously the second operator said that the rooms are too small. A room needs to be extended by 2 meters, otherwise there is no door. So we started from scratch. We were redesigning, adding the length of the room, so to obviously comply with the standards. And this is still ongoing.
And at what stage is the project?
It's at construction stage.
In construction already?
Construction stage, yes.
Okay.
James, can I just give you an example?
Certainly.
Stay in what Beata said. I think in one of the capitals in Southern Africa, we've just acquired a management contract. The hotel conference complex cost almost 100 million US. Obviously, they have not done what Beata just spoke about, engage the operator during the concept stage. So we have to spend over and above the $100 million, between $7 and $8 million, fixing the problems, placing the resort into an adequate operational phase. The back of the houses, at the hotel, at the banqueting, and at the conference facility is really very, very poorly done. So this is $7 or $8 million US, really that is completely unnecessary and could have been avoided and had what Beata spoke about been done on time and just money down the drain.
Thanks for sharing that.
The branding of the hotel is really paramount for the hotel owner. It cannot be ignored, cannot be left to the last moment. Every hotel likes to operate in a different way. They have different images for different products, and they bring incredible value for the property. It's just a very unique DNA for every of the different hotels. So, yeah, I would like to really stress this, how important it is and how important it is for architects and designers.
And for them to visit properties which are the same brand and quite similar to the project with the technical team of the operator in order to understand and have meetings there and start from scratch with very good parameters.
Okay. The opening date is often set by the marketing agency department based on seasonal demand with very little consultation with the development team. Given the importance of opening the hotel properly without contractors still in attendance, what would your recommendations be for getting this process right? Really?
But I mean, once again, I would say you shouldn't have a technical schedule and the marketing schedule to be in conflict. The marketing schedule is really the strategic schedule. There is an opening to take place, and the target is because of the market. So that's the first objective. Very often it's more likely to push forward to be as soon as possible, and too soon for the logics of the technical progress. We had in Russia, we had the Olympic Games with Sochi, and I think that all operators knew the awful situation of having a few weeks before the start and everybody arriving, hotels which were not ready, and the date was cast in stone. Sometimes, as it happened in Dubai, for instance, just works, even if the financing was secured and so on, works were stopped at the foundation or just didn't start for 2-3 years. So it was a decision made on the market because oversupply to come. So it's really, in terms of marketing, I would say that it was stated a long time ago, to build or not to build, that is the question. So that you want to get your opening at the right time for the market, and sometimes if you don't have the knife in the back of the financial cost of burying the land and so on, but you just have a land and you can sit on it and decide when. Most of the time it's not the case, but sometimes some lucky owners can just say, whoa, I'm going to delay because next year is not good to open, in 2 years' time or 3 years' time it's going to be better. I keep opening just when it's going to ramp up increasingly better than if I open in 12 months' time. Sometimes it happens. So that's the strategic schedule. Then when you come to the technical schedule, so which is most of the time how can we design and then build the hotel as fast as possible to squeeze the financial costs, to be operating in the market and get the revenues, the turnover. Then I would say that it's all about the planning of the construction, which we are used to do with the contractor. So we fix the target for the practical completion and completion of the works, and we add additional time for the FF&E installation and the training of the teams and so on. That very often we can then, depending on the relationship with the contractor, we can overlap during the end of the works part of the FF&E installation, and of course we start the training once the hotel is still, when the hotel is still with some internal works, of course, to make up with time. So that's the way we proceed, and we have some making point, key points to know if we are going to be delayed, because with every phase there are some decisions associated, the main one being starting the recruitment of the teams, of the head of departments and so on. So you have to get a pretty good view, forecast of possible delays and so on. So one key point I would say, and in Africa where there is often problems of financing, whether it is sometimes loans, debt financing, or a bit of shortage of equity, the making point is financing secured. When you get that, and sometimes owners were a bit upset by looking at this provision we can put in the phasing of the final on the conditions of the deal we sign. And basically, it's not upsetting, it's really a making point. It's just to know when the financing, both debt and equity, will be secured. And from that point, then, the planning, the scheduling of the project becomes much more safe, secured, and we can start. And all that is to save money on the owner's side. It's important. So that's, and then it's all about the transparency, the relationship you have with the contractors, with the main contractor, the project manager, so that he will tell you every month there is a report to be done with the status of advancement and so on, who does what, and this relationship and this transparency is very important. I had experience sometimes of teams, a project manager and teams working for the owner representative, who didn't dare say the truth to the owner. In Middle East particularly. So, the bad news was postponed, and we were the only ones, I would say, bringing bad news around the table. It was terrible.
I did not look surprised, huh? Okay, Tabo. As the FF&E and OS&E are significant portions of the budget and integral to the guest impression, what are your recommendations for the procurement and installation of these items?
Yeah, just the critical, I think, parts of this question is really the fact that FF&E and OS&E are significant portions of the budget. I think one analyzed that aspect, the fact that if they are such a significant part of the budget, presumably the developer expects a return on all the budget. So they have to be conceived during the design and specification phase with this in mind. Okay? They must be obviously of the correct aesthetic appeal. They must be the good quality, and they must generate this return on investment on a sustainable basis. So once these are designed, to these standards, then the critical aspect is the procurement. Who fabricates, who supplies these aspects. It's important that they are again suppliers of pedigree, of experience, who are going to be there 2 or 3 years after you started to operate, and they can fix the problem. Because otherwise, if they will fly by night and they don't exist, you have a problem. Because the second part of the question is the fact that they contribute critically to the experience of the customers of hotels. So yes, you need to have them there, continue to fix problems when they exist. So you have to choose both during the development phase, the designers and specifiers very carefully, and then whoever fabricates them, I think must done them to the right standard of quality and provide you with good support, aftermarket support after they installed or continue.
Okay, thank you. Last question, Mike, because we're running out of time. As the salary and wage costs are a significant portion of the pre-opening budget, how does one balance these costs over a longer period as opposed to the last-minute.com approach, employment approach?
I think anybody in this business knows that the last-minute.com approach is always going to be the most expensive. As Starwood, we place probably the most important component on our human capital. And that's probably one of our key success stories. We would develop a pre-opening budget for a hotel owner well in advance of going into a project, with all the dynamics in mind of a particular project and where we're working. And typically this pre-opening budget would take you from the signing of the agreement right up until the opening party of the project. Now bearing in mind we prefer to bring on new builds, we'll bring people in on, typically the general manager would come in a year, possibly a year before the projected opening date, and that person is your key guy. He's not involved in the development or the construction or anything like that. He's there to ensure that, number one, he knows the market, number one, he starts pre-marketing the property, and he employs the staff. So those are the key components of what a general manager would do. We then typically bring in director of finance 6 months before opening, and heads of departments and those type of roles on within 6 months up to opening. And then typically 2 to 3 months prior to opening, have all the staff recruited and start training those people. One of the things and the tricks to get right is, because we have clever guys in Brussels putting all of these numbers together, is to take those numbers and put them into practical purpose and to sit with the owners and say, right, does this work for this environment? Does it work for this country? If not, let's tweak it and get customer or get owners sign off on the pre-opening budget.
Thanks very much. In summary then, clearly one has to make sure that the finance is in place and is running correctly, that the design process happens in parallel, that the construction process happens in parallel, that the FF&E and OS&E and all the direct contractors happen well, as well as the appointment of the staff and the training that is necessary, the handover of the hotel, so that it all comes together in one big bang of an opening. Maybe we can take one question, one or two questions from the floor. Sorry, I've been told that we run out of time. Any questions from the floor? Yes.
Yeah, I think my question is more twofold.
I've done this before.
No, I'm talking now from the financier's point of view. So when the developer comes and approaches a financier for funding, what level of detail, from the development side, is expected at that stage? Because often we find that somebody comes and submits an application for finance, funding gets approved, and then you find post that process, then there's still going to be a lot of tweaking and so on. Post that, and then as a result, then the cost increases, which again, from the financing point of view, then we have difficulty with that. So I think that's the one question. The second one is on the, I think, flexibility of the management companies. And I think there was an example now made about general manager having to be on board a year before, and so on and so forth. All of these costs add onto the financing. And I think again it goes back to the discussion that we had in the morning about the flexibility of like bigger management companies versus your smaller ones. Because in an environment like South Africa, for example, is there a need to have a general manager on board a year before, where you have skills widely available, can be easy for you to procure somebody? Or is it now a matter of an international company now bringing in a European or an expert general manager that's now coming in to learn everything from scratch? Because I guess from the funding point of view, we always want to make sure that the numbers are right. So how do we then, from that point of view, then balance things? Because at the end of the day, we also the owner also has to get a return on the investment.
Yeah. If I may answer your second question.
Just wait for let me answer the first question. Your first question was what level of documentation do you need? Typically, that's what we call the bankable documents, which means is a concept design, a costing by a QS, market research, market feasibility, and the financing requirements in terms of the cash flow for the project. Those are the 5 documents that one typically would need to put together before one would approach the financing institute. The second question was in terms of the...
Let's take a general manager scenario. You're engaged a brand to come in and manage your assets with a brand in mind. Now, remember, there's a stabilization period of any hotel that you open, 2 to 3 years. Now, to give a hotel a fair chance of really establishing and becoming stabilized a lot quicker, a general manager is typically a brand person. So to bring in let's call him a Le Méridien or an Aloft type of general manager, those 2 types of general managers are really different in the market. They have different ways of management, there's different management styles, and there's different programs that they use to manage those properties. So as Starwood, we would really insist on bringing in a typical brand general manager to work up to a stabilization of a hotel. And that is to the benefit of the owner. To bring in a general manager, number one, that's not a Starwood type person, and you've got to then train and assess that person in the Starwood way and bring that general manager up to speed in immersing that person into the brand firstly, is going to take a lot longer than actually bringing in a seasoned opening general manager for the brand.
Thank you, Mike. Right, I think that brings us to the end, and I'd just like to say thank you to my team here for their